So delighted everyone to be able to be with us today. Excellent crowd. Actually yesterday, begins a several-month period of time where we'll be focusing on marriages and a marriage focus. It begins with this seminar this week. The first segment is actually going to conclude with Dr. Wage's sermon this morning, but the next phase is soon to begin. In fact, the brochures will be out before long. The signs are already out in the exit tower with regard to a series of lessons that Elijah will be teaching on Sunday morning on marriage in the months of December, January, and February. And then we will conclude with a workshop on March the 9th. And we encourage everyone to participate. When we're seeking for speakers to come and present on the seminars here, we looked and considered a number of different individuals, and Dr. Wages came to our attention. He's been preparing for this lesson for some time, and he's got some special pieces of information that he's going to include in this that I think will be impactful for all of us. And I appreciate, Steve, your efforts in preparing and delivering these messages this weekend. Dr. Steve Wages is a professor of family studies and a director of the Cloverdale Center for Youth and Family at Faulkner University, and that's in Montgomery, Alabama. Dr. Wages obtained a Master's of Marriage and Family Therapy in Abilene Christian University in 1994 and a doctorate in Family Care, Family, Child, and Consumer Sciences at Florida State University in 2002. He's a certified as a family life educator by the National Council on Family Relations. Pertinent to us, he's been married for 46 years, has 2 children and 4 grandchildren. Steve, it's been a delight to be able to make your acquaintance this weekend, and I appreciate your efforts. Please listen now to our brother Steve Wages.
Okay, thank you. Hey, it has been a delight to be here. It really has. I've so enjoyed our time yesterday and today. We've been working hard, haven't we? Those who were here yesterday, we've been what? Yes, we've been raising the bar. We've been raising the bar, the level of expectations that we have on ourselves as husbands and wives. But let me first commend you as a congregation. I am so impressed by your leadership, this commitment to immerse yourself in a study and strengthening of marriages and families over an extended period of time. I told the group yesterday, for a congregation this size, that was the largest Saturday gathering. People give up their Saturdays, right, to make marriage a priority. That was the largest gathering I've seen in quite some time. And it says something about your leadership, about Elisha and Anne-Marie and their work with this congregation. It says something about you as a body of Christ. So I commend you greatly for that. Hey, yesterday we suggested that there are certain qualities that we needed to pursue, possess, and perfect in our lives if we were to strengthen our marriages, right? If we were to grow together rather than growing apart. Didn't we say that? And so I told you at one time when I would present material like this, I would talk about home improvement and bricks and the bricks to build as though it were strategies. And I said yesterday, I no longer do that. The things that we're talking about are not strategies, like you can pick this one and choose that one, and I'm not good at that one, so I won't do it, or my spouse doesn't deserve that, so I won't do that. I have totally changed that to everything that's been presented has been presented as qualities. These are qualities that you will pursue, possess, and perfect in your life out of your love for God, your desire to reflect the character of His Son more precisely, and because of the working of the Holy Spirit in your life. Amen? Yeah, these aren't optional, what we're talking about. And so we conclude today, if you'll be turning to John chapter 13, we conclude today with a suggestion that in order to manifest the qualities that we've been talking about yesterday and today, we need to learn to love as Christ loved. You with me? And so I want you to watch this video.
It was now the day before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. He had always loved those in the world who were his own, and he loved them to the very end. Jesus and his disciples were at supper. The devil had already put into the heart of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, the thought of betraying Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him complete power. He knew that he had come from God and was going to God. So he rose from the table, took off his outer garment, and tied a towel round his waist. Then he poured some water into a wash basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with the towel around his waist. He came to Simon Peter.
Are you going to wash my feet, Lord?
You do not understand now what I am doing, but you will understand later.
Never, at any time, will you wash my feet.
If I do not wash your feet, you will no longer be my disciple.
Lord, do not wash only my feet, then. Wash my hands and head, too.
Those who have taken a bath are completely clean and do not need to wash themselves, except for their feet. All of you are clean. All except one.
Jesus already knew who was going to betray him. That is why he said, "All of you except one are clean." After Jesus had washed their feet, he put his outer garment back on and returned to his place at the table.
Do you understand what I have just done to you? You call me teacher and Lord. And it is right that you should do so, because that is what I am. I, your Lord and teacher, have just washed your feet. You then should wash one another's feet. I have set an example for you, so that you will do just what I have done for you. I am telling you the truth. No slaves are greater than their master, and no messengers are greater than the one who sent them. Now that you know this truth, how happy you will be if you put it into practice.
Oh, John chapter 13 has become probably my favorite chapter in Scripture. Let's look at it together, okay? The qualities we talked about yesterday and this morning, we will be empowered to pursue, possess, and perfect those qualities when we learn to love as Jesus loved. And that's what he's doing in John chapter 13. Look at verse 1. It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. He's going to say, I'm going to show you the full extent of my love. Let me put that another way. I'm going to show you how you love one another. Husbands, I'm going to show you how to love your wife. Wives, I'm going to show you how to love your husband. He's showing the disciples, this is how you love one another. And then in verse 2, does it seem a little strange to you that verse 2 talks about betrayal? Is that a little odd? It's like verse 1, I'm going to show you how you love one another. And then verse 2 brings up the subject of betrayal. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday. Why would he bring up betrayal? I thought you were going to show us how to love one another. Well, maybe it was because God knew that for most of us, we're going to be hurt deeply at some point in relationship. We're going to be wounded, perhaps even betrayed by someone who was supposed to love us the most. Let's put it this way. Jesus was betrayed by his own people. Jesus was betrayed by those who should love him the most. And some of you are going to be hurt deeply by the person who's supposed to love you the most. Maybe that's why he's bringing it up here. I'm going to show you how to love the unlovable. I'm going to show you how to forgive the unforgivable. And it may be your spouse who hurts you most deeply one day. I'm going to show you how to love them. I'm going to show you where you find the power to forgive them, for they know not what they do. It may be a child of yours that hurts you deeply one day. You have instilled a faith within them, and as the research suggests, 75 or 80% of them will walk away from that faith. Maybe you've been hurt deeply by one of your children. I'm encouraged by research that shows many of them at some later time come back to core values of which they were raised. But you've been hurt. And Jesus is saying, I'm going to show you how to love the unlovable and forgive the unforgivable. And then in verse 3, look at verse 3. He says, let me find it here. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. Doesn't that seem a bit strange to you? I'm going to show you, verse 1, I'm going to show you how to love one another. Verse 2, he brings up betrayal. And verse 3, he brings up power. Isn't that interesting? Could it be that he's going to talk about power because all relationships have power dynamics? All of them. In order to love as Jesus loved, you have to have a proper understanding of power in relationships. You think maybe that's why he brought it up. Now let's take a look here for a moment. What kind of power is he talking about in this particular moment? Let me first share with you one of my favorite quotes. To the extent that power is the prevailing force or focus in any relationship, whether between a husband or wife, parent or child, between friends or among colleagues, how about we add elders and ministers, or among brethren, to the extent that power becomes the focus of any relationship, the experience of love will be diminished. That's a great quote, and I think it's true. Yesterday we proved it with a little social research, right? Yes. You want to see an ugly marriage? You find two people who are in power struggle. That's an ugly marriage. And Jesus is going to deal with power. If you're going to love as Jesus loved, you got to understand power and power dynamics. And so what kind of power is he talking about here? Let me suggest to you, he's talking about what I would call a positional power. Smalley and Trent call it the silver sword. Positional power. He said what? Watch this. He said, God has placed all power unto me. He's given me authority over all things, right? That's power. I have come from God and I'm returning to God. What is that? That's positional power. Jesus knew what his position was. Do you remember when James and John were talking to Jesus? What did they want? They said, hey, when you come in your kingdom, could one of us be on your right and one of us be on your left? What are they talking about? They're talking about positional power and authority. When the disciples got in a dispute with one another and said, hey, who's the greatest? Who's greatest? What kind of power are they talking about? They're talking about positional power. And so I suggest, and use the concept of the silver sword, as Smalley does, that there are certain qualities that are associated with positional power and authority. If we were to try to extrapolate this into today, how do most of us experience positional power? We would probably say more often than not, we are in positions of power in our workplace, right? It's the title that's on the door of your office. It's the number of letters that are after your name. You with me? It's where you are at on the corporate flow chart. You know what I mean? What's your position? And with that position comes power. If you were to think of vocations, like if you were to go out and hire a lawyer, what kind of qualities would you want him or her to possess? Well, I'd like them to be pretty decisive, authoritative, assertive. There might be times when I'd expect that lawyer to be a bit aggressive on my behalf, right? Isn't that what you'd be looking for? I'd want someone who would be in charge, in control, someone that's got some courage about them, strong, maybe a risk taker. But generally you would think, hey, the best of lawyers are people who are very knowledgeable. I've got a brother-in-law that's a labor lawyer, and I've heard him say something like this: when I go in to try a case, I want to know more about the opposition's case than they do. Knowledge is power. I want to know more than they do. Positional power, a silver sword, can also put you in a place of protection, defending, being guarded. Right? Are you with me? Can you imagine being a highway patrolman, him or her, and you pull somebody over at 2 o'clock in the morning and they have these shaded windows, and you're going to go tap on those windows and confront someone? Do you think you need to be a mild-mannered, soft kind of guy? Wimpy kind of? No, you don't. You're going to be tapping on somebody's window at 2 o'clock in the morning. I like to put it this way: you best be Ford tough. You know what I mean by that? Have you seen those Ford tough commercials? I don't drive a Ford, but I like the commercial, where they show some, men out here working the fence line, and then they do a Ford truck advertisement, and a big emblem of Ford comes crashing down to the ground, and it says Ford tough. You best be Ford tough. You with me? Now look, if I'm presenting to you a biblical model of power in loving relationships, I should be able to demonstrate to you where Jesus took up a silver sword. Is that fair? I think that would be fair. Did Jesus ever take up a silver sword? Well, I could show you another pretty powerful video, but I'll just show you a picture of it. There's a video online where Jesus cleansed the temple. And what does it say? You had money changers in the temple who were taking advantage of the people, and Jesus had a righteous anger towards them. And he comes in, and it says he made a whip. Do you understand that? He made a whip. And did he ask them to politely to? No, he had a righteous anger about what was going on in the temple. He made a whip and literally drove them out turning over their tables, coins flying everywhere. And as the Pharisees and Sadducees come running up, he says, you've made my Father's house what? Yeah, a den of thieves, robbers. And he drove them out. And in the face of sinfulness, he cleansed the temple. He took up a silver sword. See, Jesus wasn't just a mild-mannered sort of guy. He wasn't just a mild-mannered sort of guy. But I suggest to you that Jesus also possessed a different kind of power, what we would maybe call gold sword power, and I'll share that with you here. Let's look back at the scripture and what happens here. Where were we? Verse 4. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He begins to wash their feet. He comes to Peter. Peter says, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand. I'm teaching you a different kind of power. You don't fully understand in the moment, but later you will understand what I'm doing, what I'm teaching you in this moment, he says to Peter. Notice Peter called him Lord. What does Lord mean? It means ruler, master. That's positional, right? Now watch what happens. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. Now some of the commentaries I read are kind of hard on Peter. They say out of his pridefulness, Peter opposed Jesus washing his feet. That's kind of a humbling moment when somebody washes your feet, perhaps. And so the commentaries say Peter was being a bit prideful here and refusing to have his feet washed. I'm going to suggest to you an alternative meaning. I think Peter understood positional power. You are Lord. You're ruler. You're master. It's my right, it's your right for me to wash your feet, not you wash my feet. I think that's where Peter's coming from. Before we continue here, let me share qualities. What do we mean by a gold sword? All right? Here's what we mean. We're talking about the ability to develop meaningful relationships. We are talking about qualities that will allow you to capture somebody else's heart, i.e. your wife, your children, in a way that allows you to influence their lives. Jesus is teaching them different qualities here. Integrity and character, caring and understanding, affection, being sacrificial, being patient. These are things we've been talking about yesterday and today. Respectful, compassionate, attentive, involved. These are different qualities than silver sword qualities. Sensitive, nurturing, expressive, vulnerable, humble. Aren't those different? Jesus in this moment teaching them how to love is teaching them different qualities. I simply call it gold sword. And I suggest to you that Jesus knew how to take up a silver sword, but the manner and tenor of his life, when you look at his day-to-day life and interacting with people, was that of a gold sword man. He demonstrated these qualities as he related to people. Now watch what happens here. This is so important. Don't miss this. Peter says, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. We skim over that sometimes. We don't give that verse near the attention it needs. Listen to me. Unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Yes, some would say, hey, you've got to be washed, you got to be cleansed by Jesus, right? Okay, I understand that. I don't necessarily believe that's the main thing he's teaching here. Yes, you've got to be cleansed by Jesus. You know what I think he's saying to Peter? You listen to me. He's saying to Peter, what? Unless I wash you, you have no part with me. He's saying, unless you understand what I'm teaching you right now, you have no part with me. Think about that a moment. Unless you embrace a different kind of power, a personal power, the ability to capture someone's heart, establish meaningful relationships in a way that you influence their lives, don't even call yourself my disciple. That is really strong language. Can I say it another way? I think he's saying, hey, unless you pursue, possess, and perfect these qualities in your life, don't even call yourself a Christian. That's pretty strong language. But I think that's exactly what he's saying. Husbands, wives, unless you love as Jesus loved. And then Peter says, hey, not just my feet, but my hands also. Then Jesus says, so if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. See, Jesus knew who he was. If I, your Lord and teacher, he knew his position. If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should wash one another's feet. Yesterday we spent a few minutes over in Ephesians 5 talking about this passage, and I said we would revisit it briefly today. Watch this. Ephesians 5 verse 21 says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. What does that sound like to you? To me, it sounds like mutual submission, but it also sounds like what? Washing feet, doesn't it? Not just mutual submission should look a lot like Jesus saying, now that I've washed your feet, you wash one another's feet. That's what it sounds like to me. Now look at the next part of that. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do unto the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. What's that sound like? Well, it sounds rather positional, doesn't it? Head. Sounds like, hey, there are times when you are to take up a silver sword. You're to possess these kinds of qualities. My suggestion to you is this. I said it yesterday, but I'll try to expand on it a bit here. I think he's saying, hey, you men, you're responsible for protecting your family. You're responsible for leading your family. I'm going to hold you responsible. And so I think in that he gives her an extra measure of submission. He gives him an extra measure of responsibility to lead the family and protect the family. What's he talk about in chapter 6? He talks about the devil being what? Scheming. Going about looking for whom he could devour, right? The devil, and I said to you yesterday, marriage and family is a place of spiritual warfare. You don't get married and the devil leaves you alone. You don't bring children into this world and the devil leaves them alone. It's spiritual warfare. And I think he's giving men here an extra measure of responsibility to take certain kinds of qualities and go to battle for the hearts and minds of the wife and children, the very character and souls of the family. He's saying, you men, you're responsible for that. And I said yesterday, it's not talking about authoritarianism. It's not talking about he gets to make all the decisions and not respect her opinion, her voice, and her experience. I don't think it's saying that at all. Well, how do I know? How do you know that it's not? Well, look at what it says next. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Well, where do you go to find out what just as means? Well, you go to John 13. John 13. That's what just as looks like. Hey, can I give you a practical application of what I think this looks like in our lives? I can remember when my daughter turned 16, it seems like guys started showing up more at our house, right? And so there'd be a car pull in front of our house, and here comes some guy walking down to our front door. And I would say it wasn't often, but there were a few occasions where I would step outside on the front porch, and I would reach over to the porch post, and I would take down a silver sword, and I would say, you just need to turn around and not apply. You don't even get to apply. Are you with me? I would take down a silver sword to protect the heart and very soul of my daughter and my family. One of the main practical uses of silver sword qualities in marriage and family is to protect the family. And he's saying, men, you go to battle to protect your... I like to think of it this way. What did Jesus do in the temple? He was driving the sinfulness out of the temple. He was cleansing the temple. And he's saying, I want you men to cleanse, protect your household, your family, the hearts of your wife and children. You're responsible for that. I think that's what he's doing here. You with me? And now watch this. Guess what? When I said, hey, you just going back out, right? What did I do? I reached over to the porch post. I hung up my silver sword. I go back inside, and I reach up over the fireplace mantle and take down what? I take down a gold sword. And I relate to my wife and children with a gold sword. That's different. So let me answer a few questions quickly and then try to maybe end with a story. Is it an either or? I think no. It's not an either or. It's both. You have a silver sword and a gold sword, and you need to learn when and where to use them. As women over the years, I'm for women in the workplace, but guess what? Silver sword qualities are mostly used in the workplace. As women have now very much have careers, and guess what kind of skills they have developed, much like men. They have developed silver sword skills. You want to see an ugly marriage? You see, let two people with silver swords come home and not hang them on the porch post. You got an ugly marriage. Power dynamics, right? What we need are two people at home. We said yesterday the best marriages are made up of two givers and two good forgivers. They hang their silver sword up and they go inside and they take down very quickly. What does it mean to be powerful yet powerless? There are a lot of men out there in particular who are powerful, but they are powerless. They are powerful in the workplace, and yet they have failed to develop another side of them that's required to capture the heart of their wife and their children, and they are powerless to go home. I know men who can't get their 16-year-old to mow the grass. They're powerless. I remember a guy that had an F-1 fighter pilot. I remember the story Smalley tells. This guy had the power in a fighter bomber to push a button, and he could wipe out a city block. Yet he was losing his wife and his children when he went home because he was powerless. He had failed to develop the qualities of a gold sword that allowed him to capture their hearts. Are you with me? How about I try to paint a picture, if you'll allow me. Hey, let me say this before I paint a picture. I almost forgot. I got another slide. When it comes right down to it, there are only two words a man has to remember about leading his wife and children: just as. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for it. That's a pretty high calling. Yes, I think he gives her an extra measure of submission. But look what he says to the men. That's pretty tough. Hey, I expect you men to love what? Just as. Listen, men, I think he's saying to you, men, you wash feet just as Jesus washed feet. You demonstrate sacrificial love just as Jesus demonstrated sacrificial love. Men, you be a servant to your wife and children just as Jesus was a servant. Men, you seek the will of God in the life of your family just as Jesus fulfilled the will of God. Men, you be an example for your wife and children just as Jesus said, I'm setting an example unto you. Now that I've washed you wash one another's feet. Men, you protect your house, your wife, your children, just as Jesus protected his Father's house. And I mentioned it yesterday in counseling over the years. Occasionally I come across the wife who, her husband is domineering and controlling. I see that from time to time, but I promise you, more often than not, I'm hearing women say, I wish he would lead. I wish he would step up. I wish he would decide. I wish he would be a spiritual compass for our family. I'd gladly follow the leadership of a husband who loved me just as. That's what I hear from women more often than not. Are you with me? Hey, I'm going to do something with you. Kind of step down here and kind of get up close and personal a little bit. I want to tell you a story, and I think I can do it in time to get you out in time. Really close. I know what the mark is. Mac has informed me. All right, we're going to do it, Mac. We're going to do it. I want to share a story with you. Well, Steve, how did you learn what John 13 means, what it means to love just as? So I'm going to share kind of a personal story. I'll try to maybe do a little abbreviated version to honor our time, so I'll try to do it quickly. I don't know who taught you how to love, but for me, it was my mother. Now, normally at this point, when I'm talking to an audience, I've got a bucket of chicken sitting over here. So you just envision, I don't have it, but it's a big bucket, KFC chicken. All right? And for me, it was my mother. Her epitaph reads, she taught us that which is above all things, to love. For this we honor her 5 sons. But what's strange about the book of love that my mother wrote on my heart is that the final chapter was not written until 2 days after she died. You should be curious about that. The final chapter was not written 2 days after she died. I don't know if you have ever had a God moment, what I would call a God moment, where you thought that God was making an indelible imprint upon your heart. You know what I mean? God was touching your heart. But for me, it was 2 days after my mother died. The story kind of goes like this. We got a call, I believe it was on Wednesday. Mother, who had emphysema, was in the hospital. Doctor said she won't go home. You need to call in the family. And so we quickly made arrangements. I'm living in Abilene, Texas, and we're going to go to DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth, meet my brother that lives in Dallas, and we were going to fly over on Thursday. And then our families would come join us later. So my wife had driven me 3 hours from Abilene to Dallas. We're in the airport, and I literally get a phone call from one of I have 4 older brothers, 2 of which are twins, and I get a call from one of them who says, Mom's vitals are going, Mom's passing. And she literally passed with my brother talking to me on the phone. And I didn't get to be there. And so we immediately had to change plans, right? And so we canceled our flight. My wife headed back to Abilene, which I said was 3 hours, right? And I went to my brother Ron's house in Dallas, and we awaited arrangements. I called my oldest brothers and said, look, this is going to be hard for us. Wanda's headed back to Abilene. She's already driven 3 hours, and we've got a 12-hour drive to get our family to Mississippi. I said it would really help us if we had her wake on Saturday and maybe funeral on Sunday or something like that. And so he told me to go to my brother Ron's house and wait there, and he would get back in touch about arrangements. So that afternoon, my older brother called me, and he said, Steve, look, Mom's wake will be Friday at 6 o'clock. And her funeral will be Saturday at 11 o'clock. Now, I don't know about you. I don't think I get angry easily, but I'm confessing I was angry. I kept my thoughts to myself, well, mostly to myself, and but I was angry. I think it maybe had something to do, I'm the youngest of 5 brothers. I think it had something to do being the low man on the totem pole. And wait a minute, he told me, he said, well, we have people traveling from Atlanta and different places, and they're going to need to get back home on Sunday in order to go to work on Monday. Well, guess what? Most of those other people he's talking about had a 4-hour drive, max 5 or 6. We had already driven and were facing a 12-hour drive to get there. You understand being beside myself. I was beside myself. And so Wanda's headed back to Abilene. I'm outdone. I'm like, I'm going to write them a letter when this is all over and kind of tell them what I think about their not considering what we needed in this moment, right? Which it did, yeah. And so what ended up happening is my brother Ron and I ended up getting up Friday morning, driving separate vehicles to Mississippi. We arrived 1 hour before the wake, changed clothes, went to the wake without our family. Did I tell you I was angry? I was angry. And so our families ended up flying in on Saturday morning to get there for an 11 o'clock funeral. And just before going to my mother's funeral, I literally went to the computer and I was trying to think of something I could say that would honor her memory and who she was. And I kept thinking about and the only thing that came to my mind was my mother standing over a hot cook stove. She was a stay-at-home mom, 5 kids. She loved cooking for her family. I kept seeing Mom over the stove, golden fried chicken. And I thought about it a bit, and I honestly tried to come up with something else. I'm like, certainly there's something more meaningful, something more noble, to remember Mom by other than a cook stove. And I literally tried to let go of the fried chicken, and it wouldn't leave me. So finally I said, okay, well, let's just see where this takes us. And so I started thinking about my mother's fried chicken, and it occurred to me that it was probably our favorite of her faithfully prepared dishes. We had a big family. She enjoyed cooking for our family. And you would think she would be entitled to the first fruits of her own labor, right? Yeah, she would be entitled to. And so as we would have our meal together, my mother would always take the drumstick or thighs. And that was strange to me. I'm like, that didn't appeal to me, drumstick and thighs. I preferred the white meat, the chicken breast, right? And guess what? They did too. Who? My older brothers. So you can get the picture here. I'm the youngest. I'm the positional. I'm the lowest on the totem pole, right? So they had far more seniority than I had, and they had a longer arm reach. They would get those chicken breasts, and guess what I would end up with? Drumsticks and thighs. And so as I started thinking that morning, trying to remember something to honor my mother, I thought of the wisdom of my mother's fried chicken, how all these years she had been teaching something she had learned from the master teacher. What? It's more blessed to give than to receive. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. What it means to give up your rights to meet someone else's needs. You with me? And I thought, oh my, the wisdom in my mother's fried chicken. And so I was now beside myself for a different reason. I had a story to tell. I had a way to honor Mom, and I was about to go to her funeral. So we go to the funeral, and we have her funeral there, and I have my sister-in-law. The plans were to go to my brother and sister-in-laws, and they were to take care of the meal and feed people, and people get back on the road going home, right? I go to Mary Dean, and I'm like, Mary Dean, I've got a story I'd like to share to honor Mom. And the only time I can think to do it would be maybe right before we ate together, and then we'd pray and have our meal together, right? That makes sense, right? And so we dispersed, and Wanda and I headed to Wanda's house to change clothes before going out to the country. And so we went to the house, we changed clothes. And on the way out to their house, which was out in the country, I called and I said, hey, Mary Dean, do you have any chicken? And much to my surprise, she said no. Well, guess what? You can tell I'm a person of visual aids, right? And so I'm like, I got to have chicken. I got to have all the pieces to share the story. And so I went through a drive-through and ordered the bucket of chicken that would normally be sitting right here as I talk to you. And so I needed all the pieces. So I said, hey, I need mixed. I need all the mixed, white, dark, right? And so I got a bucket of chicken, and here we go. We drive out to the country. Now, guess what? As I'm driving out, I'm thinking, oh my, we went to change clothes, and I went through the drive-through to get, I said, I hope they don't start without us. Certainly they wouldn't start without us. And so we get out to the country, and my brother's house is a big curve. And as I come around the curve, I look out and I see people scattering throughout. They had like 4 acres. They're scattering out into the yard. Guess what? Plates in hand. Did I tell you I was angry? Did I tell you I was beside myself? And now I'm beside myself again. I come driving up, and sure enough, people are dispersing. They've already got, I had no opportunity to share this, my mother's fried chicken story. And so I go inside, and if I had that with me, you would see me, I place it on the table, and I promise you, I'm going to be the first one in that. I'm going to get one of those. I'm going to get one of those chicken breasts. I had some serious medicating to do, if you know what I mean by that. And I'm like, I remember I put it on the table. And I walked over here immediately and got a plate. And I was indeed the first one in the bucket. And I took the lid off that bucket, and I reached down to get one of those chicken breasts. I reached down. I promise you, it was my God moment. The only pieces of chicken in that bucket were drumsticks and thighs. See, that's kind of funny to you, right? Rightfully so. God has a sense of humor. Listen to me. It was like in that moment, I could hear my mother's voice. Steve said, don't you yet understand the wisdom in your mother's fried chicken? Don't you yet understand it's more blessed to give than to receive? Don't you yet understand what it means to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you? Don't you yet understand what it means to give up your rights to meet someone else's needs? And it was like in that moment, I could hear Jesus saying to me, Steve, don't you yet understand what it means to wash feet? That's why Jesus says to you and me, unless I wash you, you have no part of me. Unless you understand what I'm teaching you, John 13, about love and how to love one another, don't even claim to be my disciple. Are you with me? You say, well, what'd you do with all that anger? What'd you do with that letter? You were going to write them the letter. You know what I did? Next morning, I called my 2 oldest brothers to me. My sister-in-law had been on her knees washing my mother's feet. Those 2 older brothers of mine for 4 years have taken care of her. One of them said to me, there's times at night where all I can do is hold her hand. I can't catch her next breath for her. She can't breathe. I'm just holding her hand, and she's turning blue. At least he was there to hold her hand. And it occurred to me that maybe all the stress of being caregivers to my mother, maybe they needed to get this group fed, people on their way, and for the first time in years, their lives get back to some normalcy. So what'd you do with the anger in that letter? I looked at the 2 of them and I said, thank you for taking care of my mother all these years. And I said no more. That's the wisdom of my mother's fried chicken. And I suggest to you, it's the meaning of sacrificial love. So the next time you get bent out of shape on wanting to insist on your way, you insist on your expectations, and I hope you will remember the wisdom of my mother's fried chicken, but more than that, I hope you'll remember the meaning of sacrificial love. We'll have stronger marriages, we'll have stronger churches when we learn to what? Love as Jesus loved. Now, yesterday when we kicked off our seminar, we said the Israelite people, when they returned to Jerusalem, they not only needed to rebuild their city, they not only needed to rebuild their temple, they needed to rebuild their lives as God's holy people. I'm going to suggest the things we have talked about yesterday and today, the qualities. I have students sometimes ask me, well, where's the advanced course to this class? And I look at them and I say, right out that door. That's the advanced, is right out there. That's the advanced, is can you pursue, possess, and perfect these qualities when you walk out that door. There may be somebody here today that says, hey, I need to remodel a marriage, or I need to rebuild, or otherwise says, hey, I need to recommit myself to a righteous and holy life. If there's some way the church can help you today, pray for you or such, you come while we stand and sing.